So after you understand the duplicate check, and also we show you the sample code, of course the logic is you can use in other way to do your for loop duplication, or how you will check that's duplicate or not. So that's all up to you. I just want to show you the code block. But on the other hand, of course, you can write a function to do that. So then that's one thing. So the next one we will talk about, right, after you do a duplicate check, if not duplicate, actually, besides need to add this class code into the non-duplicate classes array. The second thing actually you need to do is you need to add this non-duplicate section into the corresponding subject code object. So then we need to think about how to store that. So before we show you how you will store the subject code information, I want to show you the sample output, what we have for your assignment 5. So your assignment 5, actually, after you finish, right? So you will show me total how many duplication. So then you need to tell me total how many subject. So here is the subject. Your subject at the end you need to display is each subject in the alphabetic order. Then in that subject, how many sections? So for example, you see our COMSC have 1644. And also this one is sample output. Be careful, this one is a sample output. Your number may be different because this one may be from my prior section, prior semester. So this one is a sample output. Your number may not the same. Okay, so then you need to think about now, that's the subject result. So on the other hand, I need to know the subject code and I need to know the total section for now. So that's why here, when we want to store, you see all the information I display here, they are stored in one array. So on the other hand, if we want to do any array, I want to store the value actually is including the subject code and the total section number. Great. So that's why now that I think about our array for our subject. Because your array, save the subject information, they need to including the subject code and the count. So that's why it's not the simple primitive data type can cover. Not like earlier, our non-duplicate check, we need to have the class code equal to the section plus term. But even they do that, there still is one string. But now our subject actually is, I need to have the subject code and the total number for the so far how many sections. So that's why here, let's create another struct. So this struct is an object. So this object is the subject object. So we call this class is subject. So then they contain two data attributes. So they have a string is subject code. For example, that can be math, can be COMSC, can be English. So then they have the second one is count. So again, see here is an object. So even earlier we show you the sample output. The subject on different department is different subject. In DVC we have less than 200 department. So here you see we still you can use static array or dynamic array, but here since we still doesn't know the subject size, so then and also we want them to be flexible for the capacity. So that's why I will create a dynamic array. But now you see we have a new data type we call subject. And also here is the struct we define for the subject. So then we call this array is subject count. So good. So after we have this subject count, let's go back to see our flowchart. Okay, so our flowchart here, right? So then after I add another dynamic array is subject count. So then here, the first thing, after you know that's non-duplicate, actually when I create the subject code, the first thing is I need to see, do I have this subject code or not? So actually before I add, because you see when I add a new one is I add a new, for example, computer science 210 section. I add a section, but the first thing before I add this section, I need to know where this subject object located in the subject count array. So on the other hand, the first thing we need to check if this subject code this object exists or not. If this subject code object exists, wonderful. Then I need to, because this one, when I'm searching for this subject code, I'm using a for loop. So after I done, you see here, I also need to give that index. So I give that index, I just need to update the section number because this subject code already exists. So the easier way, I just need to add the section number +1 because remember earlier our subject is what? Our subject is subject code. That's what I will search for. So then you have your count. So if I find which object for my subject code, I just need to increment this count. So that's here if we find the subject code object. So if we find that, quickly just add that. But if you didn't find this subject code, actually what you need to do is you need to add a new subject code. So after you add a new subject code, right, so then you need to initialize that object, then you assign to 1. Okay, so you see, are you okay with this one? So after we done, of course, you see, we go back to the while loop beginning. So check to see you have question or not before we can show you the simple code. Okay, so if you're okay with the flow chart, so after we get our subject code from our parsing, so let's do the first thing. How can I check the subject code exists or not? Right, so the array I need to use is this one, right? Okay, good. So this array actually the element is subject. So we need to find this subject name is the same as this subject code or not. Right, so that's why here the first thing we need to add our struct. Okay, so let's start see how we will implement the subject code on how to search for the subject code. So let me show you in the S code. So that's why here you see before your main function actually we need to add a subject struct. So this subject struct, like earlier we said, we have the string is subject code. Then we have count is how many sections. So after you have this subject code, subject struct, so that's why our subject count array. So then we can have the data type is subject. Okay, so now let's see how should we do the duplicate check. So sorry, how to add subject code. Okay, so the first thing we need to find the subject code. So the subject code, the same thing, we need to have a for loop. So this for loop actually is what? Yeah, so now we are not checking the class code. We're checking the subject code. So this subject code, remember the subject code is before when we do the parsing, right? Did you remember the parsing? After we done, you see we're using the course name. We're using the course name to find the beginning for the subject code. Okay, so that's what we get COMSC210, but we don't want to 210, we just want to have COMSC. So now we know this section subject code is what. So we're using this one to do the comparison. But, right, I need to using the array, right? So this array is the subject count array. So, but be careful, should I using the subject count array? So that's my index S, right? So did I using this one equal to subject code? No, because this one, remember, our subject count array is what? Our subject count array data type is subject. So that's why if you're using the subject count array index, you are return the subject. So this one is a subject object, but I only want to check subject object what? The subject object subject code. So that's why when you do the for loop, you're using each index to get the element, right? But I need to check the subject code. So good. So after I check subject code, if I find that subject, good. So that's I just need to increment the section. So we need to only add one section to the count. Okay, so that's why here actually I just still the same thing. I can using this subject code as because I find that. But now because I don't use the subject code, I need to get that object, then I increment the count. So that's if we find the subject. I find the subject code object. So the same thing here, I have the index defined earlier. The reason is I need to use that later. So then the same thing here, you see, be careful, our condition, our S start from 0, but the S condition is what? It's capacity. No, it's not capacity. So again, you see, go back to see here. I have the class index is for index for the non-duplicate class. And also I have the subject index. So this subject index actually is for the subject count. So far, how many objects we have. So that's why here in your for loop condition, be careful, this for loop condition is not capacity. It is the subject index for this subject count array. So that's why here we're only searching for so far how many elements in the array. So then if I find the match, I only add one section to the count. Then since I find the match, do I need to continue? No, I don't need to continue. So that's why I break from this for loop. So after I break from this for loop, right? The one thing is they can save us time after we find the subject. I don't need to go further. And also the other thing is the break also help me is if I break, right? So then actually when you finish the for loop, you have two conditions you finish the for loop. One condition you break. The other condition actually is you finish the whole for loop, but you didn't find the subject code, right? You didn't find the match subject code object. So that's why here can tell us if I break the for loop, if the S is equal to, so of course now here is not the class index, it's the subject index. So if the S finish equal to the subject index, actually that's mean I need to add a new subject object because you see I didn't find the match subject code. So that's why the same thing when you do the adding the new subject code, right? So that's why we need to using our subject count array. Okay, earlier our subject count array. Okay, so this subject count array. So then you will do is what? The subject count array, I need to create a new subject. Okay, so that's why here the subject count array using the subject index. Okay, so this subject index actually tell us that's the next, that's the index we need to use. But here, because that's a subject count array, right? So each element actually is a subject object. So that's why here, since we define it's a struct. So that's why what you can do is you can give them the struct. So the first value is the subject code, that's a string. Then you can give them the 0. So 0 means so far your count equal to 0. So that's why we create a new subject object. Then we assign to this location. And also the most important thing is this location after we done, right? So don't forget. Sorry, because we have one section. So that's why your section should be 1. Yeah, because you add a new one. Okay, so then after you done here, right? So then you can plus that. Okay, so this part is how we will find the subject code. We see, do we have existing subject code object or not? If we have, we add section by one. If not, you need to add a new subject object. So that's